reading from Ephesians chapter 4. I plead with you then, as a prisoner for the Lord, to live a life worthy of the calling you have received, with perfect humility, meekness, and patience, bearing with one another lovingly. Make every effort to preserve the unity which has the Spirit as its origin and peace as its binding force. There is but one body and one Spirit, just as there is but one hope given all of you by your call. There is one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all, and works through all, and is in all. Each of us received God's favor in the measure in which Christ bestows it. Thus you find Scripture saying, when he ascended on high, he took a host of captives and gave gifts to men. We see in this chapter Paul talking to the Ephesians from prison. Paul was imprisoned for his faith. He says, I am imprisoned because I preach the resurrection. I am imprisoned because I preach the resurrection of the body. And I want to appeal to Rome. I want to appeal to the emperor. And in prison, he was free. In prison, he had peace. In prison, he continued to encourage his brothers and sisters in the faith. I want to tell you two stories about World War II. The first is very tragic. The nuclear bombs in Japan. The first one was Hiroshima. The second one was Nagasaki, which was an urban area, a place where people lived. Nagasaki was also the center of the Christian population in Japan. And at the first public gathering of Christians, after the nuclear bomb dropped in Nagasaki, the priest gave this impassioned speech. And he said, we were able to take the brunt of this hit. We who have hope. We who believe in the resurrection. We're able to offer ourselves as a living sacrifice, not only to save people here in Japan, but also to bring peace and an end to the world wars. They saw that it was a good thing that they, as Christians, were able to give their lives, were able to sacrifice, whether big or small. A second story, on the other side of the world, in Europe, in Poland, in Auschwitz, there was a priest, Saint Maximilian Kolbe, who was arrested for preaching against the Nazis. And he was placed in Auschwitz. And they were standing in line because one man had broken out of prison, had escaped. And so the Nazis were trying to punish those who were still in Auschwitz. And so they said, because one person escaped, and because we are cruel, we are going to kill 10 people. 10 people by putting them in this room where they will have no food and no water, in the dark, and it will be hot, and over the next few days they will die. And so they choose 10 people, and Maximilian Kolbe sees one of them and knows that this man has a family. And he says, I want to suffer in this man's place. Take me instead. Take me instead. And so, Maximilian Kolbe was put in this prison, inside of a prison. This place of torture, inside of a place of torture. But instead of screaming, instead of crying, he preached to these 9 people with him and led them in hymns, so that across the whole camp, hymns could be heard. Hymns to the Blessed Mary, hymns to the praise of God. And so that even though he was in this prison, he was in peace. Now I am saying all of this in terms of analogy, exaggeration, hyperbole. That what happened in Nagasaki is much, much, much worse than what we will have to endure. That what happened in Auschwitz is much, much, much worse than what we will have to endure. But that we as Christians should be the leaders in taking up this voluntary quarantine. We should be taking, as a form of Christian charity, opportunities to not spread the virus. We should be taking up, as a Lenten penance, how can we stay at home? How can we not go out and do unnecessary things? How can we imprison ourselves for Christ and for love of our brothers, especially those who are old, those who are sick? That we can carry as much of this burden as we are able to do by staying home. Now at the same time, we don't want to stay home merely to watch television, to binge watch, to catch up on all the Netflix and the Hulu and the Amazon Prime and the HBO Go and the Showtime Live and the YouTube. We don't want to stay home and just text and play video games and be by ourselves. Rather, the family that we are with, we have this opportunity to be drawn closer. We have this opportunity to share our emotions, to share our hopes, to share our dreams, to share our fears, to know our children better. That you, who will be 3 weeks with your children, can come out of this 3 weeks closer to your children and closer to God as a family. So that when we are released from this, as of now, voluntary prison, little prison, that we will be so excited to be again celebrating the one faith, the one body, the one baptism, the one God and Father, that we will be excited. We will say, we know what we are as a family. I know who my children are. I know who my spouse is. And now I am excited to come together as a church, having been able for 3 weeks to have joined my sacrifices to the sacrifices of Christ, for the glory of his name, for the salvation of bodies and the salvation of souls.